everybody, this is Lorena. I am an animal trainer with Synergy Behavior Solutions. I'm trying to do an outdoor live again, and hopefully I can maintain the connection. I just switched from Wi-Fi to data. If I end up not appearing anymore, then I'll just move inside. But it's such a nice day, I gotta take advantage. So I'm out here with my dog Summer at the moment, and he's just earning the second half of his breakfast, chilling. Some of my neighbors are out, so it's a nice time for him to practice some calmness around them, and just so that he sits here looking cute while I talk. So today I wanted to talk about a topic that has kind of always been a conversation throughout the various careers that I've had in behavior. And my background is working with kids in various institutions and teenagers. And I find that we have a tendency to want to tell stories and give labels based on an animal or a person's particular behavior. And so rather than describing the behavior or trying to figure out the emotional cause of that behavior, we often will label it or give it some kind of value judgment. And the way that we talk about an animal's behavior or a person's behavior really does have a lot to do with how we frame working with that creature for a long time, and also it kind of frames our relationship with them. And so as a dog trainer, a lot of the words that I tend to hear, and if people or you have ever described your dog with any of these words, please drop them in the comments. Let me know what sort of words you hear people use to describe their dogs. If this brings up any thoughts or feelings for you, I'd love to hear what sort of words you may have used or other people have used to describe your animals, or even your kids, or maybe even you. Some of the words that people kind of tend to throw around when I'm talking to them, especially about their dogs, are things like stubborn, dominant, stupid, distracted, petty. Had somebody describe their dog as petty. Hyper. Submissive. These words that don't actually really describe the behaviors that we're talking about, but do tend to create a particular story in our head about that animal and why they might be doing what they're doing. I think that these stories are really limiting stories, and they do tend to put more of a wrench into our training than to actually further our goals. And so a lot of the time when I encounter or I'm working with clients who describe their dogs that way, I don't try to argue with them about whether or not their dog is actually stubborn, because that's a very like a meta conversation that I don't necessarily need to have, but I usually will just ask, what behaviors are you observing? And if I can find out, hey, like, what behaviors are you observing, then I can work on where those behaviors might be coming from emotionally. And so putting aside the fact that dogs don't develop dominance relationships with humans, and there have been lots and lots of, hi Haley, have been lots and lots of research and conversation with people that are way smarter than me and have a lot more experience telling us that dominance is not something that happens, at least in our relationships with dogs. And also often I would say that I have actually never encountered a client dog that is exhibiting dominance. Most people will try and use that as a way to describe particular behaviors related to like aggression or certain like boisterous behaviors. One of the most interesting things that I see often is actually people who describe their dogs as dominant when their dog is actually displaying behaviors that show a lack of confidence and lots of insecurity and worry. A dog that is confident is calm and relaxed, and knows what it's doing. Nice. Go get it. And a dog that is stressed or worried is a dog that is usually loud and unpredictable. And so not only then are we often just telling ourselves a story about the dog that isn't super helpful, but sometimes we're actually going in the wrong direction in terms of understanding where those behaviors are coming from. So I, working with kids for a long time, behavioral kids and kids, institutionalized kids, etc., I have never ever met a stubborn child. I also have never ever met a stubborn dog. And people love to describe their dogs as stubborn or reticent or whatever. And often what I see is a person or an animal that is not getting its needs met. in the moment. And so if we can identify what needs aren't being met, and as the supposedly more intelligent party, we can work toward changing the environment for the animal in order to meet those needs, then we're going to see those behaviors start to subside. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is the way that we talk about training in general. Looks like I am going to move inside. Here you go, bud. Boop. Now he's going to scatter feed the rest of his food. And one of the things that I see often is the way that they describe training. So I'll see people that talk about their dogs not responding to commands. You will notice that a lot of modern trainers don't use the word command, but use the word cue. And a cue is just an indicator in the environment, and there are cues all the time everywhere, that prompts a particular behavior depending on the animal's learning history or genetics. And so when I use cue instead of command, I am not placing myself in some kind of power relationship with the animal. So we don't command dogs to do anything. They're not forced into it, ideally, if we're having a healthy training relationship with them. Yoshi wants to come over here. I'm going to bring her over. And when we come here. And so when we use words like command, we're putting ourselves in this weird like military relationship with our pets, which generally tends to bring a sort of like a feeling of betrayal or some sort of frustration when they don't do what we are asking them to do. And the thing is that the vast majority of the time, the animal is not doing the thing because they don't want to. It's usually because they can't. And so the same is true when I was working with kids. We would talk a lot about how children do the best that they can in any setting and in any environment. And I would say that's true for any person or animal. So the dogs that I work with are usually doing the best that they can, but we describe we say that they're distracted. A lot of people will say, oh, he just ignores me. He knows what to do, but he chooses not to. This just isn't how animals operate. Animals, just like us, respond to cues. Thank you, Haley. I love this shirt too. It has my dog's face on it. And so they respond to cues in the environment to get their needs met and to feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, then no learning is going to happen. So at Synergy, we don't really use the word training that often. We talk about behavior therapy. So at Synergy, we are working with dogs that struggle with some pretty challenging behaviors related to fear, maybe aggressive behaviors, anxious behaviors. We're working with dogs and other animals that are exhibiting behaviors that are an expression of their needs not being met. And usually those are feelings of safety, and a lot of the time, way more than you can imagine, it's also the animal's physical needs not being met. A lot of the dogs that I meet, people will describe them as dominant or aggressive, and these dogs are actually in pain or sick. And if I have a migraine, of which I get many of them, I am not a fully functioning person, and expecting a dog who is in chronic pain to be able to be tolerant and sweet and lovely and listen to every cue that you give them isn't something that we expect of people or kids, and it's something we should expect of our dogs either. So if you are interested in sharing, please drop in the comments any sort of words or phrases that you maybe have used to describe your dog, and how we can look more at the behaviors and the potential emotional explanations for them, rather than trying to tell a story about who our dog is, as if that's some kind of unchanging personality characteristic. When we're talking about things like dogs that maybe are stubborn or dominant or stupid, we're usually talking about dogs that are insecure, anxious, in pain, or just worried about their environment. And so we see various behaviors depending on that animal's learning history that help them try and cope with that environment or with that pain or with the worry. Another thing that I see a lot is people who say that their dog doesn't have good focus. So they'll be like, oh, my dog doesn't focus on me, and my dog is really distracted all the time. And I usually will respond gently and lovingly with, your dog isn't focused on you, but your dog has excellent focus, just on everything else in the environment, not on you. And so if we think more about the animal's perspective and what is happening for them in the space, then we are less inclined to tell stories about them in an adversarial way with us. So the other thing that I want to talk about is how we define ourselves in relationship to our animals. So a lot of people describe themselves as their dog's master or owner. Here at Synergy, we often use the phrase handler or guardian. So I really think more about my relationship as advocating for my dog, and I want to work with my dog. I'm not trying to coerce them or force them into any kind of relationship or any kind of subservient position. That's not healthy. And I think that is something that we need to leave in the past in terms of training should be something, and behavior therapy should be something that we do with our animals, not to them. And so if we just by shifting our language a little bit, we can really start to understand the complexities and the changing nature of the animal's behavior, rather than trying to stick them with a label that then ignores so many other factors that are changing, not just day by day, but moment to moment. Lots of people would describe this dog here, hey Yoshi, as being dominant, aggressive. People might describe her as being conflicted. People might describe her as being spoiled. All of these things that really don't help me resolve her struggles. They're only going to make me feel resentful, or like I'm being taken advantage of, or that I'm somehow failing as a dog guardian. And that's just not the case. It's not helpful for me to have my clients feel like they've done something wrong because their dog is trying to take over the world, or whatever the story might be. So Bonnie says, I used to say that my dog ignores me, but then I realized he was going deaf. So there's an example of a really clear and obvious explanation for behavior that is in no way an affront to us. It's the dog having a physical experience that makes them incapable of responding to cues. And I see that a lot with folks who are trying to get a particular behavior out of their dog when their dog isn't even able to cope with the environment. And so a lot of the training that we do at Synergy and the therapy that we're doing at Synergy is teaching folks to read their animals and building skills outside of the situation in which the dog is stressed. So Yoshi is a dog who for probably almost 8 months didn't go for a walk. We did a lot of work at home, boosting those concepts and those skills that she was lacking, so she had more confidence, more self-control, ability to process and regulate her environment, or her reactions to her environment, and find ways to disengage from stressors in her environment, because her arousal would go up so high that she wasn't able to think when she would see certain triggers in the environment. And after 6 or 8 months or whatever of not seeing her triggers and working instead on these conceptual skills, we were then able to go out into the world, and she was able to make choices on her own that felt good to her and felt good to me. So rather than sitting here telling stories about my stubborn and dominant dog, I understood that she was having a hard time. She wasn't giving me a hard time. And so being able to just shift my language a little bit allows me to have empathy and compassion for the animal, while also coming from being able to have a really clear way to work through those struggles. So I encourage you. I actually had a client last night, really incredible client that I'm working with, and this family is doing such great things with their dog, and I commended her for that, and I gave her some positive reinforcement for that, and then she said something interesting. She said, "Yeah, we've really been enjoying the training, and now." Hey. Words part 2. Clearly my phone is struggling with just the most basic tasks. New phone too, that's frustrating. But I just wanted to say the end of that story is that my client said now whenever we feel like we want to say no to her, we think about how we can redirect and then have a positive interaction with her. And I love that reframing of their relationship with this dog, and the way that that can contribute to so many other factors in terms of working through the dog's emotional and behavioral struggles. And it means that every time that they interact with the dog, they're paying into that relationship bank account in this really beautiful way, rather than having the dog feel confused or experiencing aversive emotional reaction to their behavior, and creating this sort of like reactionary process that was the standard in dog training for a long time, and now we know that it's not the best way to do things. So examine your words, examine the language around the way that you describe your interactions with dogs and with people, and think about how you can reframe that to be a little bit more objective about behavior, and also to to have some compassion for the other creature's experience and perspective. Think about all the factors that are affecting that dog's behavior or that animal's behavior or that person's behavior, and maybe use that as a way to determine how you can shift from a negative interaction or a labeling or sort of static perspective, a static position on this animal's behavior, and instead shift to a positive one and a changeable one. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for rejoining me. I greatly appreciate it. Gonna go see what my dog needs because she's whining and has a need that isn't being met. It's likely just that my other dog is out scatter feeding in the yard and she's having some FOMO, so I'm gonna give her something else to do. Thanks for joining and have a great day.